So when you do good business strategy, it kind of like very much parallels with good self-care. So good business strategy and having a healthy business and setting boundaries about costs also does great self-care for me as a Black woman too, where I could easily be exploited. And because I have now really good business strategies in place, it just really helps me reserve my energy, and it feels awesome and empowering.
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. This week, I'm continuing my conversation with April Harter, an entrepreneur and therapist in Colorado Springs, Colorado. She's built an anti-racism coaching program, and she's doing things in a totally new way. If you haven't heard the first half of our conversation, go back to last week's episode where we talk about the business she's built. This week, we delve further into mindset, self-care, embracing her role as an entrepreneur, and setting boundaries. You'll hear April's advice for her former self, and you might find a lot of it applies to you too. Something that I think is interesting is you and I are both highly sensitive people. And, that was one of the first things that we noticed about each other. And being an entrepreneur who's also a highly sensitive person means that you've got to really pay attention to how you're balancing your energy and your self-care with everything that you're doing in your business. So how are you kind of dancing with that situation?
So I'm laughing because when people hear this, those of you here, this is going to be interesting. So, and y'all will get to know me as you follow me. I'm just funny like that. Before I even fully get into that, the first thing I want to put out there when it comes to HSPs that often isn't talked about, HSPs, are HSPs of color. Let's just start there. The fact that I'm not just an HSP, I'm an HSP of color. I'm a Black woman. And not only that, I'm a queer Black woman who is an HSP. So that brings in that actually, I think, as a queer Black woman who's an HSP, I think that definitely creates a situation where I have certainly felt more vulnerable than my colleagues that are white and HSP. And that's something that is often, of course, I can't help it. I'm going into my anti-racism right now, going into teaching mode, which is that is something that is often overlooked. So when you ask the question, Annie, how do I cope as an HSP? Let's start there because we need to look at all of those different aspects to understand what I'm going through. So basically, what am I dealing with? I'm dealing with racism, dealing with white colleagues that are very racist, right? And I'm teaching them, right? So I'm dealing with white colleagues that are unconsciously racist, and the first thing they think of is she doesn't know what she's doing. So not only am I dealing with being an entrepreneur, as we said, and you're crazy, you're coming up with these ideas, but bring in that twist of being Black and then being an HSP and then being then teaching this anti-racism. It has a dynamic in that I have been the victim of racism and I'm an HSP. So it's like when you're an HSP and then you've gone through racism, right? That racial trauma healing, that's key. That's key. So for me, one of the biggest things I do, Annie, for self-care is that I really set boundaries. And this is going to be, Annie, because you know how I roll, Annie. I set boundaries with white people who haven't done their work because I know that I'm going to be the recipient of their unconscious racism. And this is something I even have taught with my clients who have experienced racial trauma. The importance of setting boundaries. That's key. That is so key as an HSP. So in the work that I do, it's a catch-22. I've been the victim of racism, but then I'm also teaching the very people that have perpetrated it, right? So self-care, ooh-wee, man, that's like, gotta go down. So the boundaries, right? It helps so much. My own system helps me so much because I can discern and assess for those white folks that have not done their work. And so, like I said, setting boundaries, knowing how to deal with the racism. The other thing is exercise. Exercise is very important. Self-care as an HSP. It helps me be stronger and more resilient. So yoga is key. Yoga keeps my mind, my heart, and my spirit very balanced, you know?
Can I ask you an example of when you're saying setting boundaries?
Yeah, go for it.
With white folks. Like, how does that sometimes look?
Setting boundaries with white folks would mean, let's say, for example, declining an invitation to teach, for example, without getting paid. That's a very good example because in my observation, a lot of white people want to do this work for free. And unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues who do anti-racism work, maybe don't do exactly what I do, but they're in the field of anti-racism. Many of them, they do a lot of it for free, which actually is racial exploitation, which does cause me to feel a lot of sadness. So I do try my best to teach my colleagues that are POC doing this work to set those kind of boundaries. And so it's using business in a way, Annie, business strategies and marketing and to say, no, I'm not going to do this for free. Because there is that expectation, unfortunately, for white people through white privilege. Well, we're just going to get this done for free. And the degree of emotional labor that is required, when you think about the fact that I'm an HSP, I'm Black, I'm queer, and then like the degree of the emotional labor that is required, think about all those other anti-racism educators too, and then white people want it for free. That represents, white supremacy, white privilege, white entitlement. So resisting the white entitlement, resisting the white privilege by setting those boundaries, and then also encouraging my other colleagues to do the same so that they can set boundaries too, because that's not healthy. Because, when I first started doing this work, Annie, you and I both know, I was thinking of this work like, oh, I'm a social worker grassroots, it's all free stuff. And I wasn't even aware to the degree of how hard that work was. So what has also been really liberating to me too is learning those marketing techniques. That's a huge boundary setter.
Oh, I love that. It's like you're setting up your business to assist you with boundaries.
Yeah, I think a lot of anti-racism educators, they don't get that they don't learn these things. So I feel like, coaching with you, it really did help me with self-care, like tremendously, because it's practical, but it's also connected to one's emotions because it's labor. That's emotional labor. So when you do good business strategy, it kind of very much parallels with good self-care. So good business strategy and having a healthy business and setting boundaries about costs also does great self-care for me as a Black woman too, where I could easily be exploited. And because I have now really good business strategies in place, it just really helps me reserve my energy. And it feels awesome and empowering.
And speaking of boundaries, how are you setting your prices?
Prices are important, Annie. They are really important. Again, I'm going to compare. A lot of POC anti-racism educators, they don't charge nearly as much as they should for the degree of emotional labor that they're putting out there. So right now in the beta, I'm charging $1,400 for the individual. Well, at least I was, right? I keep on getting stuck in the individual. But when I first did the beta in the individual last year, it was $1,400. That was the beta. But for the individual this year, it's going to be $3,000. Because even in the beta, what I realized, wow, again, always a learning process. I'm constantly learning and constantly transforming. I realize, wow, this is actually taking even more energy to do. Okay, then in that sense, if I increase the price, that way I'm getting paid really for that emotional labor, right? And then with the group, the beta, so it's a beta for the group though, and that's $2,000. But that's going to go up too. So the betas are going to be a lower price, which is good. And then later I increase the fee. And that has been great for setting boundaries, because what I've learned is that, and it was hard for me to accept, you really do get what you pay for. This is like, you get what you pay for. So like, if you want something that'll really help you, you really are going to pay for it, like I did with you, Andy. I mean, coaching with you is the best investment I've ever done as a businesswoman, and for my coaching clients that have worked with me, they've told me, like, this was such a great investment. I'm so glad that I invested in this kind of work, and it was worth it to me. So like, when you pay that fee, it's like there's some kind of emotional connection when you're paying for that quality of work. You're also invested in it too, and you get a higher return as well because you're fully committed. So it's a really beautiful thing. It's a win-win across the board. I'm helping them. They're helping me in business. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It's fully aligned. Love it. Yeah. And you give so much to your clients. I mean, you're all in, and you can't do that if you're undercharging and therefore having to overwork.
Oh yeah. And thank you for saying that, because that perfectly articulates that, which is that if you're working too hard, then it's like, and that's the thing, is that only I know what that is, right? So like, every person has certain energy levels. Now back to HSP. I mean, as an HSP, like, even though I'm an extroverted HSP and we are very rare, I get tired with too much interaction. So I have to limit that. And the way that I limit that is by setting a boundary with the price. That's part of how I do it, So it's just the truth,
April, if you were going to time travel to a year ago, what would you tell the April of that time? One thing that's mindset oriented advice for April of a year ago, and one thing that's more tactical.
So if I could time travel back to the April in the past, I would have trusted my gut, and I would have ignored the naysayers, which very much contributed to my negative self-talk. That is huge. I think that was pretty much the quintessential thing that caused me to. So in that sense, Annie, in a way, really meant setting mental boundaries and just trusting myself. That's huge. And like you said, like your mom or those of us, doing this work, it's like, that's kind of crazy. So you have to learn to just, it's not that what people say it's not that what they say is not important, but you also have to stay focused. It's very easy to get distracted in that negative self-talk when you're giving too much value to the naysayers. So you got to take your power back. You can't, go, they're right. I don't know what I'm doing. That fuels a lot of imposter syndrome. And so then it creates that insecurity. And when you're doing this type of work, it's not to say that there's no room for any of that, but more of it certainly will slow you down. It'll certainly slow you down. So it's like, we do have control, those that do this type of rebel work. I mean, like, we can choose to say, like, who we're going to listen to, who we're not going to listen to. There's a difference between like constructive criticism versus like just someone with an attitude that just comes to you like, there's no way you could possibly ever do this, Those folks, they just have a different mindset. So it's important to also distinguish, like, when you're a rebel, you have a different mindset than another entrepreneur. You have a totally different mindset. So being aware of that and trusting your gut, I think, is so important, because otherwise, if you don't trust your gut and you listen to the naysayers all the time and you don't keep into perspective that your perspective is so different than so many people, it's like you're drowning in negative self-talk. And then what I have found is that when that does happen, it doesn't happen anymore, but when it did happen at the beginning, when you first started coaching, when that did happen, and I did listen to the naysayers, I felt overwhelmed. Like, I felt stuck, and I procrastinated, and I felt overwhelmed, and the negative self-talk was like a big old boulder on my back that just kept me stuck. And it also blocked my creativity. That's huge. Totally blocked my creativity.
Yeah, because the whole time I've known you, you've been just, the creativity has been flowing. Like you've just been in your power this whole year, moving forward, moving forward.
Yeah. Once I did that, then once I learned to trust myself, it was easier because then it flowed. It felt comfortable. I'm like, oh, that's what that is. That's what that is. Oh, because because the other thing too, Annie, is that because we have rebels have such a unique, different perspective. And because a lot of time it is kind of isolating, I think it is also very important to, if I could do it, well, no, I mean, I can't say do it all over again, but I would say having somebody like you, and I say this, it's very important for people to understand this, is that it's important to have somebody on your side who is also a rebel. Because before that, I had nobody that had that kind of perspective. When I was looking for business coaches, and I was also looking to others for help and support, they would do their best to help me, but they didn't have that rebel mindset. They didn't have that unconventional, against the grain. Their perspective was not like that. So they gave me the perspective that they know. But then when I took that in, it made no sense to me. And it also kept me stuck in my creative process as well. So, I know this is a single question, but this would really be part two to that answer, is if I could go back, even before I met you, even my whole life, it would have been so much better if I knew, oh, there are rebels out there, there are conventional people, and I need to find more of those people to hang out with, because that feels so good. That feels so good. So just our relationship together, so much that I've learned from you just in business, but also the encouragement and the perspective. You don't feel as alone. You're often going to feel alone, but you don't feel as alone. That helps a lot. It's like, oh yeah, like I could do this. You'd often tell you, like, why can't you, April? I'm like, yeah, why can't I do that? I can't do that. Okay. Because you hear all those naysayers all the time, but just a different perspective. None of these people are bad. They're good people, but it's just a totally different mindset that it never helped me propel forward. I needed the right person, the right people to help me propel forward, that level of support. Instead of feeling like it'll never happen, or you know what else, Annie? Blaming myself. Like maybe there's something wrong with me. I then had to get out of that too. So when I stopped listening to the naysayers, I realized, oh wow, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm kicking ass.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with me. I'm pretty awesome. I'm doing good. Yeah, that really helped me.
Amazing. And then the people who needed you were able to find you, so many of them, at least, so many of us, really quickly. Like once you were in your power like that, look how quickly your following has been growing.
It's incredible. I mean, gosh, when I first started, right now I've got almost 2,300 people on Instagram. And that's huge for me because I started out and my goal was just, let's see if one day I get 1,000. One day. That's just all I thought would happen. But yeah, when people's hearts are moved, I think people tell one another, like, oh yeah, we know her and she helps, and then they tell one another. And I love social media in that regard. I love Instagram. It's just really helped me so much in my business. Yeah.
Well, and the way that you use Instagram is so incredible because you're doing it in this, it's beautiful. Like your whole presence there is really beautiful. If you just look at your page, it's so thought out. And then there's all this depth. Like you go in and you're invited into a really different kind of conversation. And then you're on there doing lives, and you're not just using social media, you're using it as a tool for transformation, and you're showing up really enthusiastically there.
It is. And Instagram is almost like, I feel like I'm painting in a way, or like some type of art that I'm doing. Like Instagram is like my creative outlet. That's why there's, and that's fun. That's the other thing I love about what I do. It's fun. It's so fun and so rewarding. I get to be so creative. It's so much fun. The business has just taught me so much about myself. When you go to the Instagram, it really does reflect me on so many levels. I mean, I love monochrome. I love what's called low-key lighting in photography. I like moody, touching, emotional art. And, I had fears about that too, even before, believe it or not, where I was like, ooh, people are going to like freak out. These black colors, like, ooh, it's going to be like creepy. I really did, because I saw everybody like creep out about like monochrome, black and white, and like, is it spooky or whatever? And like, I had to, all throughout this process, Annie, I've just embraced myself even more, just more and more and more. And the more I embrace my own unique self, it then filters into the creative outlets, which are the Instagram lives, the posts that I do. I give myself permission to be myself completely. And the more I give myself permission to be myself and to turn off the noise of the naysayers, the more at home I feel, the more centered I feel, the more grounded I feel, the more empowered that I feel. And because of that, it touches the lives of the people that I work with, and even touches the lives of people who are not yet ready to work with me, but they're thinking about it. Mm-hmm. So that's huge. It's exciting to touch the lives of people.
So what would your tactical advice be for April of a year ago?
Well, the tactical advice would be, and I still use it, Annie. So not just like, I would tell myself this now, and I still use it. It's still using that, which is that I use my sense of inner knowing to guide myself. Like, I use that. I use my own ideas. I trust my inner knowing, like connection to the trust. And I seek help from people who help me actualize those ideas. So instead of so that's the tactical part. The tactical part is getting the support. Like I said, kind of early, kind of blends in because they go together, really. They go together. You got to be able to, I would say that the mindset is to trust the gut, look for the answers inward, as opposed to comparing oneself. Because, Annie, the other thing that was messing me up too with the naysayers is that comparing myself to others. I would find myself, like, I'm so happy I'm doing this because so many people are going to hear this. I would find myself with anxiety when I would get stuck in the creative process. I felt like I was on the precipice of something, but then I was stuck. And in that moment, I had to remind myself, I had to kind of like calm myself down and go, all the answers are in your mind and your heart. They're all there, but you also got to trust the creative process. Got to trust that process. I had to let go of control, Annie. That was huge, which is, I don't know what's going to happen. Embracing the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to like sit in it and go inward and let it, like, another tactical thing for me. It's very technical and tactical. I use a whiteboard.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
I use a whiteboard. So like, I literally, to the left of me, as we're doing this interview, I mean, I'm looking right at my whiteboard. And every time that I get that itch, I go inward and I go, oh, well, but no one's ever, no. And then I go, stop it. I silence my mind, stop it. And I grab my little dry erase marker and I get my butt up at that whiteboard and I start putting stuff down, even though it may or may not make sense. And I dump my ideas.
Yeah, no judgment. No judgment, just bam. And it's almost like a meditative state. You just like, instead of stewing in it, I just get up and go, okay, I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to put it out there. Again, giving myself permission to also be in that creative process, to be myself. And creativity is very much linked to oneself. You being yourself. So then that is like a very technical thing that I do. And I do it for every single thing. So for those who are like, how do we as April come up with these ideas? Well, trust and believe me, I've been hit that whiteboard every single time, every time. Excellent. When you think about what happened during the Rebel Therapist Mastermind, what do you think was helpful there in transforming your business?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, like I said, is the support. Gosh, it helps so much to be around fellow rebels. It helps so much. it was so exhilarating. I mean, the first time we got together, and I know you know this, Sandy, but for those who are listening, I mean, like, it was exhilarating, just exhilarating. I was like, I'm not alone. Like, there are others like us. Wow, like, this is so amazing, and the cool thing about that is that and this is just my experience, at no step in the process too did I have any naysayers. There was always really great constructive criticism, but it was not a space where there were naysayers. That was fantastic. That was the first time I ever experienced that in my entire life, because I've always been in a room full of naysayers telling me that my ideas were kind of out there. And now it's like, it was so cool. It's like I would come up with something and pitch my idea to fellow rebels. And then it's like, instead of, oh, I don't know, be like, oh, that's so interesting. And, maybe you want to do this. And I'm like, whoa, I never thought of that before. Like, I never, and so it was, it was just like, I still got like, good memories of that. In fact, I mean, I love this so much. This is really like, it was such a memorable experience for me that I actually have a keepsake of it. So I went ahead and purchased the necklace on Etsy. And to remind myself of who I am, I actually purchased a necklace that's engraved and it says Rebel, and I wear it every day, because it reminds me of who I am whenever I feel like, but I don't feel as much now as I used to back then, like not believing in myself, because there was so much of myself that didn't believe in myself. So having the support is huge. And that I feel is like really a huge foundation, because without the support of like-minded people in that regard, and then me then just taking the plunge into the unknown, those two things combined, that just opens so many doors for me. And it continues to open more and more doors. It just gets better and better every day. Every single day, it gets better and better.
That's so beautiful. I got to get one of those necklaces. I love it.
It's so cool.
So April, what's the best place for people to find you, throw compliments at you, and learn more about your work?
So the best way you can learn my work is to go to aprilharter.com. So it'd be www.aprilharter, which is HARTER.com.
Excellent. And you're going to find an awesome ebook there that you can get started with for free. And you're going to be able to sign up for webinars and just do all the awesome stuff.
Absolutely. The ebook is, I would say for those that are listening, the ebook is I direct you to my website to go to the ebook, because the ebook is really an initiation, an introduction to my work. It is really the most quintessential thing that you need to begin to understand what I'm all about and how my program can help you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, April. I really appreciate you bringing your whole self to this conversation and sharing so much with us.
Thank you, Annie. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity, the platform to reach to so many people. It's been wonderful, and I hope that when those that listen, that it inspires you to do bigger things.
Thanks for listening. I'm offering a free live online training next week, Wednesday, January 16th, 2019 at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, and I would love to have you join me. I'll be sharing 3 things that entrepreneurs know and that you should too. As a therapist in private practice, you actually are an entrepreneur, but you might not always think of yourself that way. You can make an impact beyond the therapy room if you want to, and your business can help you do it. I'll introduce you to 3 things that can help you feel more empowered and in charge of your business. If you can't make it live, you can get the recording if you sign up. To sign up, just go to the show notes at rebeltherapist.me/podcast/88. Or just go to rebeltherapist.me/podcast and find today's episode with April Harter to sign up. Easy. That's rebeltherapist.me/podcast. All right, I'll see you next week. That was fantastic. I'm going to turn that into 2 episodes.